And now please join me in welcoming our first speaker for today, Mr. Milos Raskovic. Milos is a principal product manager lead in Microsoft, and today he will demystify for us the AI product management. He will show us what the AI is really, and does a product need an AI, and what is actually the role of product manager in AI product development journey. After this presentation, we will have a dedicated Q&A session, but feel free to ask your question in chat at any time, and Milos will for sure address them later on. So Milos, we are ready when you are.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you very much, Liliana. Let me just go ahead and share my presentation. Let's see how that works. Screen. Perfect. So just a quick check. Can everyone see? Actually, Liliana, maybe you can confirm. Can you see my presentation? Can you hear me and see me properly?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you.
Good, good. So thanks everyone for coming. I hope the morning coffee kicked in and that you're enthusiastic about the upcoming day. I hope and I think we're going to have a lot of fun. So, I mean, as Liliana nicely introduced, we're going to talk about demystifying AI product management, and specifically, my goal is to there is a lot of these terms circling around, and a lot of articles talking about how AI is the future of everything, right? Like everything is going to be AI assisted. And you probably heard many of these terms. So my goals are multifold. I really want to put the AI into the perspective of the overall product development cycle and talk more about what is the PM role in this new world of AI assisted product development. Now, before going into the agenda and into the details, I'll just share a bit more about why me and why do I feel I have enough confidence to give a perspective on AI development. Before doing that, I'll also just I'll introduce Alexander Ilic. He's on the call, his camera is on, you can see him. He's my friend and my colleague who will be assisting me throughout the presentation. And I'll say in a few minutes about how you can ask questions, raise hands, etc., so that we want to make this as engaging as possible. So before going into the agenda and the details, just to share a few words about why me. Why am I talking about this? So in general, I've been a part of Microsoft Office Serbia team for more than 10 years. And our core expertise has been in content understanding and AI. So in general, if you would ask within the office, like who are the experts in knowing how to productize AI, I think they would often refer to us as one of the key players in that area. And we had an opportunity and privilege to work on many great experiences, including Microsoft Designer and Microsoft Editor, which really wonderfully showcase the AI in Office and how modern AI needs and should be productized. And in addition, we worked on a lot of content transformation. But in a nutshell, under the hood, our goal has often been to really understand user intents in different formats. Like there is one way in which users write Word documents, another in which they write presentations, etc. And we really had an opportunity to work on many long-established products like Word and PowerPoint, but also on many other formats, like we did the V1 we worked on V1 for Microsoft Sway, and we had an opportunity to really work on PDFs and images and various of these content types. So that's in a nutshell, and that's a little bit about the advertisement for the team as well. So as for the agenda, we're going to really there are three key segments that I want to cover. And one is, what is AI? When does a product need it? The goal is really to put the AI into perspective in terms of how AI has matured and what we can do today. The second topic will be about AI product development journey and the role of PM. So that's really putting the AI and the PM in the overall product development journey. And I think the third part is going to be probably the most interesting, because we're going to dive deeper in what does it take to build an AI solution. But I really want to make sure to set the context before that so that we give the whole picture. Now, having said that, I also want to just give a disclaimer. I don't think we'll be able to deep dive into some of the very specifics of AI development. My goal is mostly to do an intro talk and to provide the whole picture, but we'll definitely do, like, I also will have surveys, and I also want to learn, like, what did you like here? What did you want to deep dive? And I'm really happy to connect beyond this presentation to talk about various aspects of product development or AI, etc. And I hope we're going to have certainly some time after the conversation to really discuss. When talking about discussion, a couple of things. Feel free, I'll make stops at the end of each of these sections. I try to keep them within the 10 minutes. Feel free to raise hands. Feel free to put your questions, comments within the chat. Alexander will be helping me to aggregate all of this and maybe to surface the most upvoted one or the most interesting ones. So the goal is really to have a discussion, and we'll certainly reserve some time at the end of this presentation. And once again, connecting beyond this presentation is also great, and I'd love to network and discuss. Good. I think we covered the overall intro part, and I think we can go deep dive into the content. So what is AI and when does a product need? Now, before going into some of the details, Alexander will also post a link to a survey where one question, one rating to just assess on the experience with building AI solution within this audience. So we can probably adjust some of the discussion based on that as well. We really want to make it as dynamic and as useful for you as possible. So I'll leave to Alexander. I'm seeing he posted. Let me also open up the chat so they can look at it. So it shouldn't take more than 20 seconds. I'll just make a pause for those 10 seconds more. Good. Let me proceed. I mean, feel free to fill in this in parallel. I think Alexander will also put some results. We want to make it public. Everything is anonymous, so feel free to fill in at your convenience. So as an intro, I think it's really important to differentiate when does a product need AI and what is the difference between traditional programming and machine learning. So in essence, previously within the traditional programming, the goal of the product team and engineering has been to develop rules that will process certain inputs. However, over time, that input has been made significantly more complex. So now we want to process images, videos, language, 3D world, metaverse, etc. And it's becoming possible, really, for a human being to be able to derive rules based on such a variety of inputs. Take as an example, like cat on an image. So you can take one image and we could assess together what could the heuristics be, like what would an MVP be, but then take another image, which could have a completely different set of rules. So it's really the input has been made significantly more complex, and it's really impossible for human beings to be able to process and derive such complex heuristics. So that is why in machine learning, you have the inputs and you typically feed the system and the algorithm with results, with the actual results of how the output should eventually look like, based on which the algorithm and machine learning and AI creates the rules that are used in the system. That's in an essence, and we'll go much deeper on this. So to put things in historical context, like AI has matured significantly. So and I think that move and that maturity has been especially visible since 2012. So in the last 10 years, that is when the era of deep learning really begins. So that's when the AI could start doing a lot of these fancy things. Before that, there was a lot of machine learning and AI mostly applied to natural language processing, but the last 10 years has been really significant. Moreover, what is really important, within the last 2 or 3 years, just the last 2 or 3 years, within the times of this COVID, there's been another significant step function increase in maturity and what AI can do. And that's where the large language models, the GPT-3 and DALL-E come in, where AI is able to generate content based on our inputs. And I'll do a demo on that later. I'm also seeing the results. Thanks for everyone who filled in the response. I think it's really great, and it gives me a good perspective on the level of details I should go in and the amount of context I should provide. So thanks, everyone. So that's been the historical context. But if we look in the future, our view, and I think based on everything that we know, that we're really just starting the AI journey. And we really feel that the era of AI-assisted design is really just in its early phase, and there's going to be much more that will happen. So if you take a look at this hard system that's really heuristics and soft data system that's really AI, we are just starting. Now, that's in a nutshell related to what happened with AI, and then now I'll apply this more deeply into the product development cycle. But let me also showcase, because I'm assuming that many of you didn't have a chance to see how this looks in real life, like what is this AI doing? Let me showcase. So this is DALL-E. OpenAI developed DALL-E. DALL-E is able, based on a prompt, so-called prompt, to generate images. So let me try something like this. Modern skyscraper in Van Gogh style. Let's see what DALL-E will do. Now, note, this is not a Google search. It's not searching among the existing repository of things. This is generating images based on what I just entered. So this is like net new creation, new creative idea. And this is fascinating. Like, we didn't think this is possible just 5 or 7 years ago. So this is amazing. It's similarly with text. You can write a prompt and you can get a whole blog. Like, this is totally mind-blowing today. So that's where AI is today, and it's really matured significantly. Now, I also want to mention, like, I'm a PM, so I like to productize the AI. So there's been, like, when we talk about the history and the timeline, there's been a huge amount of research before. But when I talk about AI and what I'm going to cover in this presentation, it's mostly about productizing AI and, like, where are we in terms of using AI in real world applications. So we're there, like, we can do a lot of these things. I'm going to have 5 takeaways along the presentation. And the first one is, like, AI has matured. We can use it. We can productize it. We can make amazing things with that. So this brings us to the next agenda point, which is AI product development. So if we look at the whole product development cycle, what has changed with AI and what is the role of PM? I'll make a quick pause here. Any questions? Anyone wants to ask anything based on the content so far? We can probably take 1 or 2 questions at this point. Good. We'll still have a lot of time afterwards, so I'll feel free to proceed because there is a lot of things we want to cover today. So if we take a look at the overall journey, we'll talk about different steps. I'm going to talk specifically, I'm going to use an example. I think it's always easier to better understand things through an example. And I'm going to use a very simple example of a feature that we developed. This was really co-created with the Excel folks and driven by my PM colleague here in Serbia. And we did together a lot of these technologies. So data from picture, what it does, you can have a mobile from an Excel app. You can take a photo of an image, of a table on an image. You would get that into the app, which is the second screen, where the AI would also highlight what are the cells that you should review. And we're going to talk about that user experience and the importance of keeping human in the AI loop. I'm going to talk much more about that. And when you review all of that, you really get the table, like from an image to an Excel data that you can process in seconds. So that's the example I'm going to use. And this is a short summary of the scenario. It's available. You can try it out today. You can install Excel and try it out today. So I when we talk about product development journey, I generally like to distribute things in three different phases. It's the problem space, where we need to understand what do we want to solve. And then there is the solution space, the large solution space of how do we want to solve it, how do we want to solve it. And within the solution space, I typically differentiate two different aspects, which is like testing things before we code that, before we have engineer code that and put that into the product. And then the other part, when we identify what is the right solution, putting that in the code and bringing it in the market in front of the users. Let me cover each of these phases in a bit more details. And to give context, like the third agenda topic, when we focus on AI solution, that's going to be really solution space and production. But I think it's really important to put everything in the whole context to talk about AI and PM, because I think the role of PM is really, really important in the phases before. So when we talk about the problem space, this is where we identify what do we want to solve, for whom are we solving. And let me outline immediately, like I feel this still remains to be the core PM priority. Like, what are we building? Why are we building what we build? And when we talk about AI, what changes with AI? I would say the opportunities change. So I think there is still the same process. You need to talk with customers. You need to look at the telemetry data. You need to figure out what is the right problem. What is the next V2? What is the next feature that we want to build to monetize things, to have a better go-to-market, etc. But AI does unlock a lot of opportunities. And I think it's really important that today each PM has this like one-on-one knowledge and experience on what AI does, because it changes your view on what and how we can solve. But still, the core accountability of PM remains identify what we want to solve, why do we want to solve that, and what do we feel that will bring to the user and to the business. Now, takeaway number two, and if I'm going to summarize what I've just said, like, and this is mostly for PMs, like, remember what you're paid for. And what I want to really say with this is, like, we as PMs in a traditional product management role, we're paid to figure out what are the right problems that we should be solving. And I think that doesn't go away with AI. Now, if we take a look at the solution space pre-production, so typically what I'm seeing this here is like so we identify what is the problem we want to solve, what are our success metrics, and before actually coding this and getting to engineering team, we want to test a couple of solutions, typically mock, creating PowerPoint, creating in Figma, in whatever tool. We want to mock as much as possible to figure out whether some of those solutions resonate with the user and in what direction we should be going. And I haven't done that, but let me do it right away. I haven't applied the example previously. If we take a look at the example of data from image, like the Excel example that I was talking about, in the first phase, in the problem space, this would be the space where, for this example, together with Excel folks, we've identified, we had an insight that a lot of data analysts have content locked in images that are either on a hard copy, literally, or simply in images that are shared, screenshots of PDFs of whatever is on the screen. So that was the insight. That was the problem that we thought is worthwhile solving to unlock higher usage, engagement, retention. Now, when we talk to this solution space and pre-prod, what is currently shown on the screen, this is where we started creating an end-to-end, totally mock, totally fake, to figure out whether what types of solutions would really resonate with solving this problem with the audience. And if I'm to summarize this aspect and how PM should be involved and what happens with AI, I think this is still a lot falls within PM accountability, but I've intentionally put a lower number here because, like, this is typically where you get user research and design involved. Sometimes it's a single man show and a PM needs to do most of this, if not all of this. But in like traditional organization, like you would have some design and user research and you would together iterate on this. And assuming we need AI, this is the step where you should emulate the AI. Emulate the end-to-end process of how you feel the AI would be working. Like do an end-to-end mock, assume that AI is imperfect, and we're going to talk more about that. Assume AI is imperfect, do the overall end-to-end to figure out whether that solution actually resonates and meets the mean bar for the user and it's worthwhile exploring. So this is in this case, we would really create an end-to-end, socialize internally to figure out what tech is available, what we need to build, and user test with users to verify whether this really solves their needs in the right way. So that brings us to the next takeaway. And I generally don't like using this term because I think it's often used, it tends to be sometimes used in the wrong sense, but fake it until you make it in terms of AI and in terms of a pre-prod solution, I think is very important. And what I mean by this, try to emulate as much as possible of what the AI would do before you commit to building the full solution, because that's very costly, and we're now coming to that. So assuming we did all of the emulation, we tested everything, we have a solution that we want to build, this brings us to the productization. Now we want to build it, we want to get it, we want to get the real solution on the market in front of the users. Now, what has changed with AI? With AI, this process typically lasts much longer than a traditional heuristics-based development, because you have the applied science in the loop, you have the data in the loop, and typically you need much more iterations in collecting the data, training your model based on that data, analyzing what is wrong, iterating and pivoting on that. So that process is typically much lengthier than a traditional process we had so far. Now, when we talk about PM and what is the role of PM, I feel in this phase, the applied science comes in, the engineering comes in, and in a way, it's more of a shared accountability between all of these things. And what I'd like to emphasize is this focus on data. So previously, when we were getting to a heuristics-based solution, typically the engineering would already have a lot of great context and could do a lot of things on their own. Of course, there are always these mini trade-offs that one needs to solve along the way. But here, focus on data is critical. And I'm going to deep dive on that on a separate specific slide on the top. So this brings us to the next thing, and I think we're pretty good with time, which I'm happy because we're going to then be able to do a lot of discussion. I'll pause here. I see a question in the chat. Let me just quickly read it. And if there's any additional questions, feel free to write it down or simply raise your question. Good. So the question is, I'll read it out aloud. Could you tell more about process of identifying jobs to be done and unmet needs? How do you approach this from a PM perspective in Microsoft? Ivan, thanks a lot for this question. This is really a wonderful question. And I think there are a lot of nuances in how do we do this in large organizations and Microsoft. Let me, for the sake of time, I feel this is a very important but slightly separate topic. For the sake of time, let me leave it for the end of the presentation. We can touch base a bit more about that. I'd really prefer here that we focus more on the AI solution aspect, and I can come later to this. And happy to talk. I'm coming in the evening, and we'll have time at the end, and we can do a one-on-one connection as well. But let me just park it for now so that we focus on the AI part, and then I'll come back to this. Once again,
sure.
Thanks for asking. Thank you, Ivan. Good. Building AI solution. So in general, there are three aspects of an AI solution. You have a model, typically built by applied science using a lot of data. You have the user experience. User experience changes quite a lot when you build AI, because AI is imperfect and you need to account for a lot of those things in user experience. And there is the integration, right? The engineering part on how everything fits together. Now, in terms, we're going to do a deeper dive on model and user experience today. And for integration, I'll just briefly mention, I think it's often an underestimated thing, because often it takes a lot of time to integrate those models and make sure they work well in the overall system with the data pipelines. And it's often underestimated task, but often a significant task of a significant cost. So, but I'll park that for now so that we can talk more about model and user experience and what does a PM need to do for those two. So if we talk about model, I'm going to cover 3 aspects where I feel PM needs to be really involved: data, accuracy, and performance. Let's go through each of these. If we talk about data, I think this is maybe one of the most wonderful representations of what I've saw so far on how the models are built. So let me put it this way: model is as good as the data you have, and that's it, period. And typically what happens, the me part is a data scientist looking at some of the data, and typically PM is very involved and critical in identifying what is the right data, and that takes significant time. I'll talk about examples. And then data scientists using that data were typically provided in collaboration between PM, applied science, and engineer, and creates a model. And the model is always imperfect. It's very important to remember. We'll talk more about that on the user experience aspects. So what are some aspects of data and why does PM needs to be very involved? So first of all, you need to identify what is the data you need. And the output of a model, again, is as good as the data. So the data really represents your audience, your target content, and the job that needs to be done. And it's critical that PM is involved even in identifying the right data for the target scenario. So that's like in building the solution, I think that's really, really important that PM is involved, and it takes significant amount of time. If we take a look at the example of scanning an image and putting it into Excel, what would that mean? It means that you would need to collect a lot of data, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, but you need to collect a lot of data. And you as PM, I've spent in these types of problems tens of hours. You need to look at those data yourself and figure out, is this representing well the job that I'm solving for the user and our target group? Because that is where PM has the most context. And I spend literally, I mean, cumulatively speaking, certainly hundreds of hours scrolling to data and figuring what is the target and what is the non-target data. Now, this brings us to the second aspect, like where do you find the data? And that's often a very tricky question, actually. I mean, I know that typically people, the gut reaction is like, hey, we have a lot of data in production, or we'll use the public data. I mean, that is okay, but each of these data sources has its pros and cons. Production data, let's start with that. Ideally, you would be able, from production data, from what your users are doing, to simply use that data to develop your algorithm. But almost always, that is not possible, because user content is the most sacred thing that there is, and you cannot look at that data. Like, it's not allowed, and it has never been allowed that anyone can like read content from another user. That's impossible. So typically, production data is a no-go to start with, because you really need to be hands-on with the data. What you can get from the production data is some usage patterns, like what was the user clicking, what were they doing, but you cannot typically create an MVP just from production data.
Milos, we have one hand raise.
Perfect. Diana, thanks. I'm seeing your hand raise. Let me finish this slide, and then I'll go to your question. Give me just
no problem. No problem.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. So And often what you would refer to, like if production data is no-go, which is often the case, like you can get aggregates from production, but that's often not good enough. Public data, you crawl the web for the data. Now, that's great, and that's typically how a lot of data is collected. The downside of that data may not be as representative as the data and the scenarios that you're building. And then there are many other aspects, but I won't go into too many details here. Like you can get synthetic data, you can build your own data. For instance, we were doing for some of those things, like where we would have phones of different resolutions and quantities. And then we would have different lighting experiences. And then we would be taking photos from different angles. So we need to have data that is as real as possible to the actual scenario. Finally, you can crowdsource data, you can ask people to collect data, you can purchase data. And at this point, let me also say one more thing, because this is, I think that data is really important thing. It's like things, and this brings us to the like, how do you use it? Like the types of data you need may vary significantly. I've intentionally chosen the example of Excel and like getting data from an image of a table, where the ground truth is known. When I say the ground truth, like when you read the document, you can have a labeling team that goes over that image and says 17 is written here. And that is ground truth, 17 is written. But there is another segment of AI problems, and I'm just putting it out here for the overall context, which is much more subjective. So for instance, we have built a technology used in several products that is able to create a color palette from an image that you would apply to your document. So now this raises a question, what is beautiful? And what is a good color palette? And that is extremely subjective. So one of the techniques that could be used there is that you have multiple people labeling the same data and comparing things and saying what I like the most. And then using the most upvoted for features and designs to train your data. And then how do you use it? I'll just continue this list. You can use the data as for a reinforcement learning, like algorithms and experience can get better with more data. And one more aspect is training versus constraining. Like today, like previously, you would need to label a lot of data. Like you would need to say, this is the output time. Today, with these huge models that are able to provide some output from the get-go, like the DALL-E. Like DALL-E is pre-trained. You can get that model, you can use that model, but you still need data for the constraining part, I would say, because you need to have data that would say what should happen, what shouldn't happen, and how to limit the system. I'm making a pause. Dejane, thanks for raising the hand. Please shoot with your questions.
Yeah, well, basically you answered one part of the question, I would say, but I was interested, like in the first, these first couple of tables on the left that you shared, like that you said, like you spend tens of hours like going through data and basically making decisions, what makes sense, what doesn't. How do you make it objectively, right? How do you choose, and how do you, how to say, is there any possibility to maintain an objective approach to deciding what makes sense and what doesn't of all of the data that you're looking through?
Yes, I mean, that's a very good question. Thanks for asking it. So yes, you typically try to derive some rules based on knowing the customer on what are the types of data. So for instance, one rule could be, hey, here is an example. We're going to look at data tables. That's a huge scope. Data tables being text in first row or the first column and then a lot of numbers. What we said initially, we won't be looking at the so-called layout tables, where you use tables to organize content. Like often people used to just organize text, like where they, instead of using columns in documents, they use tables. So for instance, that's one objective rule that you could use, and then you typically develop a lot of them. But there is a fine line, because eventually you will be saying, hey, this is a set of things that need to work, and then you will go back and forth in defining rules and just subjectively talking with the customer and extracting what are the tables that mean to that. Excellent question.
Thanks for answering.
Good, thank you. Perfect. I know we're 2 more minutes within. I'll try to briefly go within the next 5 minutes. I know, I mean, Anna took some of my time. I'll use that as an excuse. So the 4th really important takeaway, data is the spec. I would put it that way. Data is your functional spec. Now we're going to talk a little bit about trade-offs. And I mean, this is just an intro thing, because when we talk about accuracy, when we talk about performance, it's always a trade-off. When we talk, and something where PM needs to be really involved. So when we talk about accuracy, AI is and always will be imperfect. So for instance, here is an example of a table, and imagine that AI just detected one number. So I'll just demystify briefly to introduce precision and recall. This is perfectly precise. Like AI detected exactly on what is on the screen, but the recall is terrible because it didn't capture a lot of other endpoints. Typically, what you're going to end up is that, it's always a curve. Typically, you decide on what point you want to be, whether you want to optimize for high precision or high recall. And you typically end up with examples like this. There is a lot of things that PM needs to be involved to define the success. So when 2012 is wrongly detected based on one letter, do we say that the whole word is incorrect? How do we track that accuracy? So these are some questions, and we obviously went in a lot of depth for Excel on that, but I won't go into detail just because of the sake of time. Happy to talk more offline. And here is just an example where you need high precision and where you can optimize for recall. In the Excel case, you kind of want to optimize more for higher precision and ideally highlight the things where you're not certain about. But these are numbers. These can be dollars. Like somebody could be making decisions based on these numbers. So you want to optimize a bit more for higher precision. But in experiences like Designer, like in PowerPoint, when you open a Designer, you get a lot of options for your slide. You can optimize for higher recall in terms of showcasing more variety, because it's very simple to click. You click one, you don't like it, or you see something is wrong, you click another one. So you can optimize more for higher recall. But the bottom line is there is always a trade-off here between precision and recall. And I'll expand on the takeaway one. So what was previously written, AI has matured, and that is correct. But it's really important to note, but it will always be imperfect. Now, I'll just run through this quickly for the sake of time. There is a lot of considerations that where PM input is also needed, like how performant does the model needs to be? Does this thing ship on phone and needs to work on a client, meaning the model needs to be smaller, but potentially then accuracy is lower? Or do you need to be cost sensitive? These large language models tend to spend a lot of money and processing power, but it literally comes down to dollars. So what's the budget that you can afford to spend, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really a trade-off, like how fast does your experience needs to be, how precise your experience needs to be, how much budget you have for running those models, etc. So let's talk about user experience. Thanks for staying, and thanks again everyone for coming. I know we're running a little bit over time as well. I'll make sure to wrap up soon and open up for questions. User experience. So there are many aspects that you need to think about in designing user experience, but I'll outline these 3. So you need to make sure that user always feel that they are in control. Like AI will never be able to just do things. User need to be in control. User needs to understand what AI has done. And typically it's the role of a PM and designer to really set the expectations up front on what AI is possible to do. And you always want to have a feedback loop. Like feedback loop can help with reinforcement learning. Feedback loop can help with just knowing what the accuracy is in the real world, because everything you develop before you ship to production has some accuracy, but then you have the real world and the data that people use, which may differ from the data you used initially. Here are just two examples of how we implemented these things within Microsoft. So for instance, I've talked a lot about Excel, and there we developed a special way to identify cells that we want you to review. That's where user feels in control. Look, I have the detected table at the bottom. I have the image that I've just pictured at the bottom. I'm in control. I thank you, system, for helping me. I see that you're imperfect, and I see that you're keeping me in the loop and that you're helping me through this process. That is the sentiment that you want your users to have. It is also editor, like spelling and grammar, something that's used everywhere today. But look at how things are positioned. Spelling, double check if this is correct. So AI is not saying fix this. It's like, hey, double check. I think this is incorrect. I think you should get involved and verify this. Then you have also the feedback loop, ignore all or ignore. And look, and I love this aspect. I mean, I know we just take this for granted, but 3 options are offered. So this is wonderful. So user can choose from an option, user have a palette, and we get a very direct signal on what works and what doesn't work. This is fantastic. So when it comes to user experience, you typically need to account, like, the most important thing, user needs to be in the loop, and you need to account for a lot of these different things. Now, I know this is a bit overwhelming, bear with me. We've developed, and you can find, this is like public research paper. There is a lot of things that we need to think when developing the AI, and this is like the very comprehensive list of things. Typically what I would do, and what many people do, you developed an intuition for how you need to handle AI, and typically like we develop something and then use this as like a set of guidelines that we walk through, like, did we make clear what system can do? Did we make clear how well the system can do what it can do, etc., etc. But this is a very comprehensive and I think a very useful list that talks about all of the different aspects that we need to think about when developing AI solutions. So, yeah, if I bring the funny side to this, like the 5th key takeaway. So one aspect would be like, always keep the user in the loop, but saying it differently, don't piss off the user. Because if AI just does things without providing feedback, that pisses off the user and they lose confidence in your feature, in your product. We never want to lose that. We never want to have that. Good. I'm seeing also a question in the chat. I'm finishing in a minute. There is, and then we'll come back to the discussion and questions. Finally, we talked about model, we talked about user experience. Now, a very important thing today, and something where in large organizations, where I and Alexander and PMs spend a lot of time, is ensuring that the AI is responsible. When I say responsible, Microsoft follows these 6 guiding principles to shape everything we do. It needs to be fair, it needs to be reliable and safe, everything needs to be private and secure, like we really care a lot about privacy, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability. Now, what does it mean for a PM? And what does it mean for an everyday job? It's like, it often, like fairness. Do you have diverse enough data that represents your scenario? Did you omit certain target group? Did you omit certain aspects? Because then the AI wouldn't work well and it wouldn't be fair. So in large organizations where you need to ship AI for a product on a huge scale, this is something where PMs could spend a lot of time, and not just PMs, it's also engineering and applied science in ensuring that there are rules and guidelines constraining the AI system and ensuring that it doesn't go wrong in terms of what it does and how it does. So that's pretty much it. Summarizing the 5 key takeaways, I think those are these. And again, I'm opening up for discussion. We have only 7 more minutes. Thanks for bearing with me over time. I'll just outline, hey, this is my LinkedIn profile. My goal and intent is really to create a network and to get embedded. Feel free to connect. Feel free to reach out offline. tell me what you wanna discuss more, or what you would like to hear more about in the next talk. And Alexander will also share like an end of presentation survey soon, where it's really be honest, direct, transparent, reach out to me directly as well. The goal is just to learn how do we maybe improve this presentation going forward, and what else could we bring. Good. Coming back to the questions. And look, folks, thanks everyone for coming. If you want to drop off, like take a rest, take a deep breath, feel free to drop off. Thanks so much for being here. I'll stay here all the way until 10 or even beyond that if needed, to discuss the questions and things that you have. Good. I'll go, feel free also to raise your hand if you have anything. I'll go back retrospectively to Ivan's questions. Could you tell more about the process of identifying jobs to be done and unmet needs? How do you approach this from a PM perspective in Microsoft? Look, I don't have a too specific answer. I can also generally tell that typically as a PM, you own a certain KPI or a certain area, and you want to identify certain problems that needs to be solved. How do you identify those problems and that audience and then jobs to be done? I like to look at it from three perspectives. Like there is, and I think this is universally applicable. It's really hard to be more specific. We look at the telemetry, what people do today in our product that's broken. We talk with the users a lot, with a targeted segment. And I think the wonderful thing about Microsoft is that you often have experience to work with a lot of different audiences. We talk with education, with corporations, small companies, consumers, but you talk with your target audience. And three is you look at what the market trends are, like what's happening today, what are competitors building, what's simply trending within content creation, within authoring experiences. And we really combine all of this on a specific problem contextually to identify the overall job to be done and how does our area of our feature needs to fit into that. I'm happy to discuss about more specific examples, or if you have any sub questions, feel free to let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is also a question from Slav. Do you include non-technical roles in minimizing the biases in ML algorithms? It's a bit easier if we're talking about Excel tables, but what if we're talking about some more sensitive cases? So yes, the general answer would be yes. You definitely include some non-technical roles. And I think it often, like there are multiple aspects. Like when doing the responsible AI review, you typically have someone from legal, you typically have someone from security, you may have some HR as well. So it really depends on the situation. But where you test this a lot, you need to test these things with your users and just verify what type of data are they using. Have I identified the right target audience for my scenario? And ultimately, it comes down to the data you have. To get to the right data, you need to talk with a lot of customers, and you need to review your algorithms later with the responsible AI crew to ensure that everything is taken into account. So I think I wouldn't really constrain this to the roles, but there are a lot of different people, some more technical, some less technical, that really help a lot along the journey.